Big Bang. Ooh, the birth of space-time energy and everything we know and love about this universe.
In a recent video, Joe Rogan and Neil deGrasse Tyson had a conversation where they were discussing whether the James Webb Telescope disproved the Big Bang. In the video, Neil deGrasse Tyson had a lot of insights as expected. There were some things that I could say we agreed on, and there were some other things that we didn't. On this channel, we're going to look at issues through a biblical lens. So, this idea of the Big Bang and the multiverse, whatever direction you lean, particularly for us as believers, it's important that Genesis 1 is still there. In the beginning, God created. So this is kind of where we're coming at it from. In Psalm 19, it says, the skies declare the work of his hands. So this is where we're starting at. And this is kind of the starting point. I want to make sure that, for the channel, we want to look at issues through a biblical lens. So that's kind of where we're going to start from. Give Alex a few minutes to introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Hi, thanks for having me, Joel. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Alex McElroy. I have a channel called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. I have a apologetics ministry called Proof for the Truth, where we provide apologetics workshops that churches can host. We also do a conference once a year, typically in April. So stay tuned for that. You can go to proofforthetruth.org.
Cool. Where's the conference going to be at in April?
Chicago.
All right. So let's go ahead and kind of share the video. The video is about 15 minutes long. I don't think we're going to share the whole video. We'll probably just share the snippets that we want to kind of hit on. We're going to head and probably roll from the beginning. I don't remember there being any cussing in the video, but just in case, it is from Joe Rogan's channel. So be aware. All right.
Yes.
Well, it got there, and then we did some engineering. So I guess a year and a half. Yeah.
And what has changed in our understanding?
So that's been people's first question. And what I want to do is temper that to say something a little different. So yes, we expect James Webb to make great discoveries. We expect that. But the first order of business is hardly ever, let's discover something new today. It's, here's something that we have limited understanding of. Let's improve on that. And in so doing, we deepen our understanding of how things work in the universe. That doesn't always involve overturning a previous idea or discovering something that nobody ordered. All right? That will happen. We fully expect that to happen. But we targeted parts of the sky initially because we know.
So I just want to share something here. On the 50-second mark, he says something that I found quite interesting. He talks about limited understanding. My thoughts were, let's deepen that understanding. And as we kind of progress in the video, we'll see him kind of add more detail to this whole limited understanding and deepening understanding, and how we build on the understanding that we have. We don't discard what we've learned in the past.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think also, I would just like to say that, I'm not here to, as it were, Neil deGrasse Tyson and his scientific. And I believe I've heard before that he's not opposed to the idea of God, which I can at least respect. He's not blindly cutting God off as some others would. And I do also appreciate him tempering Joe Rogan's idea, because I think that is often what those who may not believe in God are looking for. They're looking for the kind of the nail in the coffin to say, oh, finally we can say we're done with this and we don't have to even think about God anymore. It's not going to come, but the desire to kind of have this matter settled, as it were, is I think in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, they're looking for that gotcha. It's just isn't there. But let's go ahead and keep showing the video here.
Yeah.
Because we know other telescopes have gone there before. And we're going to say, how can we further advance and deepen our understanding? One thing it's going to be able to do, and it has already done, we have, how many exoplanets there are? And I don't know how many of your audience was born after 1995. How many 27-year-olds and younger?
Probably quite a few.
Quite a few. Okay. So I will take this opportunity to knight them Generation Exoplanet.
I did think that was pretty funny. Scientists and all that, a lot of times they don't get credit for their humor. That was pretty funny. I give them credit. It's a little cheesy, but it's funny.
Absolutely. And Neil,
1995.
he is funny.
My bad, Alex. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying he is funny. I like listening to him.
Was the first exoplanet discovered, a planet orbiting another star. And I'll never forget that because it was my first time on national television. I was freshly minted as director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. And NBC sent New York City is the media news headquarters, right, of all the. So NBC sent an action cam. They interviewed me because of my title, not because they knew or gave a crap who I was. My title was director of the planetarium. And so I gave my best professorial reply. I said, well, the Doppler shift, this is how it's discovered and what we do and how we measure it. And I was describing the fact that when you discover these planets, you don't actually see the planet. It's the effect of the planet's gravity on the host star. And so if you watch the host star like jiggles, okay, just a little bit in response to the planet going back and forth around it. So you're measuring the star. So I motioned that like with my hips. And that evening on the evening news, that's all they showed was me jiggling my hips. I said, oh my gosh, that's how you're going to, okay. You want me to be Professor Neil. You want me to be Soundbite Neil. All right. So from then on, I practiced my sound bites. And a soundbite's like 3 sentences.
Oh, so you recognize that this is the format now.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't just give them my stump speech as professor of physics. It has to work in their medium. And so I went home and stood in front of the mirror and had people put out things to me, anything in the universe, any idea, object, person, place, or thing. And I would come up with like 3 sentences that are interesting, make you smile, and be tasty enough to want to tell someone else the anatomy of a soundbite. So try it. Say anything in the whole universe.
How do we know how?
No, just one word. Just say anything.
The Big Bang.
Big Bang. Ooh. Birth of space-time energy and everything we know and love about this universe.
All right, so I'm going to pause it there.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that little? All right.
Yes.
Go for it.
So, really interesting wording. The birth of space-time energy and everything we know and love. I think it's interesting. He said the birth, and I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm sure he was just talking and not really thinking about the particular words. But later, he's going to kind of posit multiple births, or at least some unknown birth. And, the Big Bang and all its components indicate that the universe did have a birth or a point of causation or a change from non-existence to existence, which is what the Big Bang theory upholds. And all of the things that support that theory, the redshift, Einstein's theory of general relativity, the radiation afterglow, the great galaxy seeds in the early universe discovered in 1965, I think, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. All of these things put together conclusively show that the universe had a definite moment of beginning or causation. So the question's the same for Christians and atheists, which is how did it start, or who or what started it? I've asked kids this question. I've asked a lot of people this question. Which one makes more sense? Something coming from nothing or something coming from someone? Just logically, which one makes more sense? I think that's a good starting point, because I think then we're rightfully looking for who could have birthed what we now live in.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's kind of more or less what I have too. Is it's interesting to kind of hear him say that. He says it occurred 14 billion years ago. Later on in the soundbite, we have no idea what happened before it, and we're still expanding as we will forever. That kind of seems to point to what we see in Genesis 1. But
yeah, those first 4 words of the Bible, in the beginning, God. Those 4 words say so much. And even when we look at other ancient Near East creation stories or things of that nature, something that's interesting with the Bible is what it posits humans to be in that first chapter, and also God's creation ex nihilo, that in the beginning, God. God is there, and then there's a beginning because of God. That's a unique idea. And so, I mean, we can say, oh, that's just how the Bible wrote it, or Moses, or whoever. But that seems like a really unique revelation to get with no scientific data or evidence, where only in the last 100 years has science caught up to that idea.
Right.
So for all those who want to kind of bash the Bible, the Bible has some things, it says some things that science is just now catching up to. So then I have to ask the question, well, how would these, people with no scientific background or training know this, if not by God?
Yeah, and I think that points, to Romans 1 as well. It kind of talks about how we have this innate knowledge of God. We know that there's, that He's there.
Yes, absolutely.
Let me go ahead and flip back to the video here.
All right.
14 billion years ago, no idea what happened before it. And we're still expanding, as we will forever.
I read an article.
That's my soundbite for the Big Bang.
It's a good soundbite.
Yeah.
I read an article about the Webb telescope, and what they were taking into consideration is the possibility that the universe might be larger and older than we think.
So, I hesitate to ask what pages on the internet you hang out on.
It was a legit. It wasn't saying the universe is older. It's saying as.
All right. So here we have this. We have Joe kind of jump in, and he's chiming in about this article that came out. I think is back in September, and kind of did a little digging to find it. So the article is pseudoscience. There's this guy Eric Lerner that holds to this belief about the Big Bang not being supported by science or not being real, and it has been rebutted by other scientists, other scientific articles, and the evidence for the Big Bang, as we'll hear Neil continue to explain, it's like insurmountable. The evidence is super, like, think about the highest level of evidence, and that's kind of what you have for the Big Bang. There's basically maybe a slight chance or like no chance of that changing. One of the things he talks about, my bad, Alex. He talks about more data and new information are coming in, and the distinct possibility that the Big Bang just explains the research technology and not the scale of the universe itself. The problem is that as more data and new information comes in, it continues to support the Big Bang. It's not going in the other direction. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And so the the statement, we have no idea what happened before it. So here's where you need a multidisciplinary approach, that maybe science or astrophysics is not the only tool we need to use to figure out the answer here. I forget who it was, but talked about kind of philosophy being the kind of the queen of the sciences. And really, you have to use philosophy for everything else. Even the PhD is philosophy, like it's in the word. So let's think about this logically. We can't have a state of infinite regression. Just logically, there can't be. Not because I say so, not because the Bible says so, just because if that were true, if we go infinity in the past, we never arrive at today. So there has to be a stop point or a beginning point, because we can't be today without it. So that's logically true. So there is a point of beginning. Now, it doesn't really matter for that part of the discussion if somebody thinks the point of beginning was the multiverse starting, or the Big Bang, or God, or whatever you want to call it. If there's a beginning, we have to reconcile that ultimate beginning and what could have created or caused it. And in many ways, multiverse just messes up the whole situation, because it makes it a much more complicated issue unnecessarily so, I think. But the question is, what created space, time, or matter? What or whoever that was that composed, can't be composed, rather, of space, time, or matter. So whatever, that's just axiomatically true, that whatever creates the first existence of these things can't be those things. It's kind of like if somebody says, I'm going to invent the first hammer, and then you ask, well, how are you going to do it? And you say, I'm going to use a hammer. Well, there are no hammers. You're trying to create one. So if we're talking about something or someone spaceless, timeless, immaterial, we're beginning to build a list that seems otherworldly, supernatural, and I would say like God. That's just following the evidence. I didn't quote any scriptures. It's just I said this one time when I was talking with another astrophysicist, Dr. Ross, and he was on the channel a couple times, and I said, this is not God of the gaps for me or for us or how we approach it. I really think we need to coin this other term, science of the gaps, because there's so many unanswered questions, and questions that not just aren't answered, can't be answered.
Yeah, as you were talking about the multiverse, one of the things that as I was doing a little kind of preparation for the video, I was looking into it from a fine tuning perspective, and this is from Philip Goff. He is not a Christian. My understanding, he's more of a deist. But here's one of the quotes he has: "Is according to eternal inflation, there's a vast, exponentially expanding megaspace in which certain regions slow down to form bubble universes, or a universe being one such bubble universe. However, there is no empirical ground for thinking that the constants of physics, the strength of gravity, the mass of electrons, etc., are different in these different bubble universes." So, we look at this idea of the multiverse. It doesn't answer the question. And he uses the analogy of a monkey typing English on a typewriter. And more monkeys doesn't explain why this one monkey is typing in English. It doesn't explain it. It just kind of creates more of a question.
Yeah.
And he says, what we need explaining is why the only universe we've ever observed is fine-tuned, and the postulation of other universes doesn't account for this.
Right. And that's a really good point, because answering one question doesn't answer every question. And Hugh Ross, equally trained astrophysicist, just like Neil deGrasse Tyson, but also a passionate Christian, and actually came to faith by studying astrophysics. He wasn't a Christian when he went to college. So he's also talked about, when you look at the data, now this is way above my pay grade, but he broke it down and showed how, when you look at the math, the smallest universe necessary to create one planet such as ours is the universe we have. So I think because our brains, our minds, we are so small comparatively to everything else, we look out there and say, man, this massive universe, and it's so vast, and every star is like, 30 million miles away from each other, and it seems so big, and it is to us. But if you're in that field and you can do the math, you can see it and condense it and understand that, or not condense it, but you can understand that in order for the matter to be created, to create one life inhabiting planet, this is actually not as big as it may seem to us. That doesn't do anything to say what other universes or stuff is out there, and that's really not that important, to be honest with you. Like, it's cool to know, it's cool to think about. It doesn't tell us how to live here, though. And it doesn't give us more meaning for life. And actually, he talks about meaning later, which we can talk about when we get there. So this is John Lennox, who is a professor at Oxford, mathematician, PhD, as well as a theologian. And he has said, he's a scientist himself, and he said, the success of science sometimes leads people to think that because we can understand the mechanisms of the universe, then we can safely conclude that there was no God who designed and created the universe in the first place. This reasoning commits a logical error in that it confuses mechanism and agency. So a quick example is, knowing how an internal combustion engine works does not mean Henry Ford never existed. These both things are true, right? So simply understanding how God did what he did does not mean God didn't do it. That's a logical error. That's a philosophical fallacy. So there's that part of it, and there's no need to take science to that extra leap of being the arbiter of everything. I love science. I talk about it probably more than most things, but it has its place and it has its limitations. And that's okay. That's good. God has given us tools to investigate this universe and this world and ourselves, which is a beautiful thing. I was talking with Abdu Murray, and he reminded me of the scripture that says, it is to the glory of God to reveal a thing. To conceal a thing, and for kings to search it out. And it's interesting because he talks about how, you have a baby, and then the baby learns to walk, and then you're excited. The baby's excited because they've discovered something new. You, as the parent, already knew what walking was. You've seen people walk. It's not a big deal for you. But to the baby, if we were able to extrapolate this example, it would be like, oh, I've discovered everything I need to know about life. Like, no, you haven't. You know, but the understanding that we gain should make us worship him more. The
Yeah.
intricacies I learned about, like I was reading something about water from a scientist, and just how amazing water is, how it started, where it came from, what it does, how it's such a unique molecule in all of the molecules that exist, which makes me want to be like, God, like, man, this is amazing. Like, how did you think of it? Like, that's the response. So if we're coming to the evidence and the scientific evidence or whatever it may be with that approach or that response, amen. But if we're coming to it thinking we've figured God out of the equation, I think we've gone too far. So C.S. Lewis famously wrote that there's a difficulty about disagreeing with God. He is the source from which all your reasoning power comes. You could not be right and he wrong any more than a stream can rise higher than its source. We don't have a whole lot of time to delve into this here, but I think the scientific realm lends itself to people doing this more so than any other discipline. But the way to kind of explain what he's talking about, it would take longer, and I've done other videos on my channel about it, but let's just take one example of DNA. The language of DNA is, to me, inexplicable scientifically. How such a language could arise from nothing and out of nothing, not out of a mind. But DNA is the precursor that we need for cells, for molecules, all this stuff, and eventually us, and then we can think, right? But we're usually examining at that level. Okay, so I have this ability to think and reason, and then let me figure this stuff out. But how'd you get that ability? So it's often putting the cart before the horse, and then you're missing the prerequisites that you would need to have in place to even be able to have this discussion, to even be able to say the things Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying. He's able to do so because God's given him the prerequisite cellular DNA makeup to be able to have that ability. So even if we had perfect scientific knowledge and we could explain every detail about the universe, that still misses the point of how we had that ability to explain it. And I think that's obviously a conversation probably for another day, but it's not really in the realm of physics, it's more in the realm of chemistry, biochemistry. But though that's why we need a multidisciplinary approach to really thinking about these types of things.
No, I agree, and that reminds me of this quote that Frank Turek says, where he talks about, said you have to sit on God's lap to slap him in the face. He's the source where we get this ability to, as Alex just broke down for us, right? We don't have this ability of reasoning in of ourselves, right? It's not just us. It came down from somewhere through DNA, and then information doesn't just pop up. Something creates, or someone creates this information.
So Francis Collins, who's former director of NIH, which you can argue that he was the most famous scientist in the country for decades, maybe still is, helped, one of the few people who helped map the human genome. He was on that project, but he's also a passionate Christian and the most famous scientist in the country, arguably. But he has said, we live on this knife edge of improbability. The unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics points to God's existence. There's no particular reason why all the events in the universe should follow simple mathematical equations. I'm not a mathematician. John Lennox is, and he would affirm this as well. But you can really break down the universe in math, which is amazing to me. And actually, let's look at the next slide. I think there's something on there where we can look at some of the unreasonable effectiveness that he's talking about. Okay, so the probability of the evolution of the human genome by Barrow and Tipler, I believe these two physicists broke this down, is between 4 to the negative 180th power raised again to the 110th power, somewhere between that number and this number, which is the top end of that spectrum is 4 to the negative 136th power to the 110th power. That number is so small, it cannot be written out. When your theory rests upon a statistical probability that is so infinitesimally small, perhaps you need a new theory. That's how I would say it. I mean, if you're willing to believe the chances that we're here, but based on these astronomically small numbers, and you're willing to put all your eggs in that basket, then you're already believing a miracle. You might as well believe another one.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I have a friend that's an atheist, and this is a while back. We were talking, and I was asking him what his worldview was, and he mentioned methodological and naturalism. And I did a little digging into the worldview, and my response to him was, because we were discussing the topic of miracles and whether there's any evidence for it or any of that. But anyway, so but my response to him was, well, your worldview doesn't even allow you to investigate it. You have to discredit that right off the bat. So maybe there's something wrong with your worldview.
Yeah, that's good. Robert Jastrow, I believe, worked at the the Wilson Observatory, but he in his book, I think, God and the Astronomers, I think in the first chapter, he lets everyone know he's not a Christian or a theist, that he's agnostic in his worldview. But he does say this: now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The details differ, but the essential elements in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis are the same. The chain of events leading to man commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time in a flash of light and energy. So he's saying, the Bible gets it right. I mean, we have the evidence now. We can see what we couldn't see before, and this seems to be pretty accurate and amazingly accurate given when it was written.
I think, as we look at the evidence and as we kind of continue to discuss and as we go back to the video, we kind of see the same thing. There's a pattern here. The only way to kind of ignore the pattern is if you already have this kind of bias going into it. If you're open, it's kind of hard to ignore it.
Yeah, I agree.
I read an article about the Webb telescope, and what they were taking into consideration is the possibility that the Big Bang may be incorrect and that the universe might be larger and older than we think.
So I hesitate to ask what pages on the internet you hang out on.
It was a legit. It wasn't saying the universe is older. It's saying as more data and new information comes in, there is a distinct possibility that the Big Bang might just be it just might explain the reach of the technology and not the actual scale of the universe itself.
Okay, so the way to think about this is, and this is the way science has worked since basically the year 1600, where Galileo sort of starts codifying what people knew probably should be happening, but no one really did it in large scale. If you have an idea about something, then you test it multiple ways and get other people to test it. And if the tests give you consistent results, you have a new understanding of the universe. When that happens,
So I think I found this interesting here. He mentions Galileo and he talks, but he describes that Galileo did, and I could be wrong, but it kind of sounds like he was just like kind of describing what we call in school the scientific method. When he's describing that Galileo was doing this was years ago. I'm not really sure what time frame Galileo lived in, but he also mentions how this new understanding doesn't negate previous understanding. It makes it deeper. He says only understood a small part of a larger whole. Small parts, they're confirmed that the things didn't change. So it's building on this previous understanding. It's not changing anything. It's not you're not getting rid of what you already knew. It builds on that knowledge. He talks about Einstein and he builds on Newton's laws. And I think this is important because it shows that the laws don't change. And as we kind of progress into the conversation and continue looking at the video, as he talks about the multiverse, I think this is an important point, that the laws don't change. I found this quote here he's talking about a Catholic priest, Georges Lemaitre, and he talks about how he introduced the hypothesis of the primeval atom, which he derived from Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. According to this hypothesis, the universe has been expanding since its birth. This means that moving the clock backwards, the universe used to be a highly compressed cosmic egg, which expanded at the moment of creation. Einstein was skeptical about this hypothesis because he believed, as did most cosmologists at the time, that the universe as a whole was always in an unchanging, steady state. However, the Big Bang theory, which is based on Lemaitre's original hypothesis, is now the most widely accepted theory concerning the earliest stage of the universe.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember looking a while ago at Einstein, and he didn't like the conclusions of his own theory. He tried to kind of even fudge some of it and tweak it, but then I think Arthur Eddington and others kind of were like, "Yeah, you can't do that." So, but he knew, I think, that the belief in an eternal steady state was comfortable because if there's no beginning, you don't have to prove a beginner. But once he proved a beginning, I think, and actually Arthur Eddington, a quote from him, it said, "This presents insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on this as supernatural." Insuperable difficulties. And there's another quote by either Einstein or someone else that said, basically that this is a bad thing, or I don't like this. And I'm like, why are all these feelings getting involved? We're just doing science, right?
Right.
But I think because they understood the implications of what the discovery meant, that you can't get something from nothing. Definitely not a universe. I don't see that. I don't see evidence for it. And so that presents a problem if you're not willing to put God in the equation.
You're trying to answer the question without looking outside the box. I like that analogy from J. Warner Wallace and in a couple of his books. He kind of illustrates that. Very helpful when you picture it that way.
Yes.
Big Bang, because the Big Bang is not going to go away and support this. So now I've got this Big Bang thing, okay? And, well, is this embedded in something bigger? Ooh. So when you put like quantum physics and general relativity and you try to come up with some bigger understanding, deeper understanding, string theorists have been all into this, you get a multiverse. We didn't pull that out of our ass. That came out of the equations. So how old is the multiverse? I don't know. It's definitely older than our universe because it birthed our universe and it births other universes and it births, the way the equations drive it, an infinity of universes. This is the idea that maybe there's a version of us in another where I'm bald and you got, but everything's the same.
And also a version where everything's the same.
Where everything would be the same, yes.
Everything you've ever.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. You have some thoughts about what he kind of said in that minute. He said a lot of things in that minute. It's crazy how much he was able to kind of fit in that short amount of time. Big Bang is not going to go away.
Yeah. There was maybe I guess we'll keep playing it. There was something that Joe Rogan said in response to him that I thought was interesting too. That I don't think he intended it to be, but
I can let it play. Did you know where you want to stop?
I'll know it if I hear it.
All right. So I'll continue playing because I have thoughts kind of from here on forward. So it's not
Cool.
We'll be good.
Said has been said before exactly in the same order.
Correct. There's no reason to presume that everything in this universe isn't or hasn't already played out in the exact way in these infinite universes.
And in an infinite number of different ways.
Correct. And so that is what comes out of the equations. So that makes the Big Bang a kind of a small part of a much larger whole. And so, we're ready for that. But the fact that the universe had a beginning 14 billion years ago, and there's the cosmic background, all of these features are intact. They're not going to all of a sudden not apply. That's my point. That's my long answer to your
this
clean
thing
question.
that happened a billion years ago, what is the predominant theory of why?
So this multiverse concept gives us a reason why. Okay, so it's like imagine you're rolling around in a basin, okay, and you're stable there, you're just fine, but then something kicks you out of the basin, and you didn't know that there's a huge hill to roll down after you come out of that basin. But you didn't know that. You thought everything was just fine. You roll down that hill, you're gaining energy. At the bottom of the hill, something stops you. And then where does all that energy go? One of the hypotheses, and I'm highly simplifying here, is that the energy gained by rolling down a hill, and these are energy hills that would exist in this sort of higher dimensional space that we're talking about, that energy has to manifest in that object somehow, and it becomes an explosion and gives birth. With enough energy, it gives birth to matter, everything that we know and love, and it expands because when you concentrate that much energy in a small spot, that's the only thing you can do.
I understand that you're simplifying it, but I don't understand.
Simplified it in the sense that by using this basin analogy and rolling down a hill, that they're equations of the energetics of a system And this is called a false vacuum. So you can be in a place that's not the true bottom energy state of the system, but you think everything is fine, but it's not. And so if you move around among these hills and valleys, you end up birthing universes out the other side. And this multiverse concept actually delivers this for you, basically for free.
That thought would be that the Big Bang is just one of many events that happen in the multiverse.
Correct. And not only that, it could be that other Big Bang events might have a slightly different laws of physics in it. So you want to watch out for that if you cross over from one universe to the other and the charge on the electron is slightly different. You could all your atoms could just scatter or compress into a pile of goo. Yeah, so take something to test first.
All right, I think from there it's just kind of them of going back and forth for a bit. I wanted that last point he talks about, and on the 13-minute, 14-second mark, he talks about the charge on the electron. If it's slightly different, atoms could scatter or compress. So you got to be careful with that, right? I think that's the point. If there was something, that small change could alter everything. This is kind of the point when we look at, fine tuning and the cosmological argument. This is the point that we're making. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
No, that's so good. Okay, so now that we heard the full thing, the multiverse doesn't explain everything, and everyone doesn't see that in the math. So to just simplify it and say, okay, the math gave us this, and therefore that's how we all scientists know this, is not true. Because I've talked to equally talented, knowledgeable scientists, not just Christian, but both, who don't see it, and who think it's grasping at straws. So without me being an astrophysicist, I have to rely on all them, or the totality of them, I should say. But this is where it always goes off the rails for me, because it always tends to descend in kind of this wild speculation. It's not testable, and you can't have infinite. So it's not a machine. There's this idea of some sort of like I think on Dr. William Lane Craig, they did a video on this, and it was like this universe generator, and it was like pumping out universes. But the question is, who built the universe generator? Do you see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, it doesn't answer any questions. And so, what is the predominant theory of why? This is the question that I think Joe Rogan hit on, something that I don't think he realized he was hitting on. And my channel is called Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. Purpose is connected to why, it's connected to meaning. And I think only in Christianity can you ground purpose, can you ground meaning.
Yes.
Neil deGrasse Tyson didn't answer the question. I think he thinks he did, but he didn't. No. Joe Rogan said, why? Basically, why are we here? That's right. Kind of the essence of the question, right? And an astrophysicist can't tell you that. At least not one who's disconnected from God. But even if, regardless of astrophysics, if you believe in pure naturalism, then there is no meaning. Like if what Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying is true, then there is no meaning. There is no why. It just happened. So we're no more special than a tree, just because it all just came out of whatever this primordial egg or whatever they want to say is.
Yep.
There is no why. So that has a lot of other ramifications that we don't have time to go into today. But here's the thing. Once again, science can't answer that question anyway.
Exactly.
It's not built to answer that question.
Yes, that's exactly what I wrote down. Science isn't equipped to answer the question of why. That's not something that science can do. Absolutely.
And so science can tell you what, it can tell you how, it can tell you when or where a lot of times. That's it.
Yep.
I mean, so that's not a bad thing. It's not a knock on science. It's just that's not the discipline you go to figure out why. The multiverse concept, Tyson says, gives us a reason why, and it doesn't. Even when he's describing this basin and this false vacuum, this is another. If you're not watching and listening carefully, a lot of people will miss this part of it.
Right.
He said something stops you. What stops you? Where did the something come from?
there's a lot of assumptions made in the whole analogy.
Absolutely.
Where did the hill come from? Where did the object is rolling down the hill?
Right. Where did the basin come from?
Exactly.
No,
I'm with you. And I think one of the things he mentions too, and he talks about like the energy. And so I did a little digging on this idea of energy because I was kind of curious, especially as we're having this discussion. Now, energy doesn't just come out of nothing. It's something happens to create the energy. So you can't point to energy as the initial start of the Big Bang. That doesn't work. Energy would have been a byproduct of the Big Bang.
And also, no one can define what energy is. So like we're I don't know if people know this, but scientists don't know what, and when I say ontologically, like what is energy? What is it? What is gravity? We know how to calculate gravity, but they don't know what it is. There's so many things that are unanswered. That's why I say science to the guess, and that's not a knock against science. Just we've only gotten so far, or we just be. My thing is just let's just be honest about what we know and what we don't know. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know the origin of life. All scientifically, I'm saying we don't know. Like there's things that are huge gaps. So to posit this basin in space that kind of was, and then he said, enough energy and it gives birth to everything you know and all matter. He said you end up birthing universes out the other side. Like what?
Right.
Like I respect him. He's a brilliant man, but so it just bursts universes, not just a planet, a universe, just picking them out. That seems like just a lot of speculation. But even if it's true, it doesn't answer the question. So I think that can't be missed too.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And one of the things he also says, and I think this is Joe Rogan as he's talking about the speculation of things being, different in other universe and exactly the same infinite number or different ways. Well, I think what they're kind of, describing, or what Joe was kind of presenting in a sense, kind of describes who God is. God knows all things, right? He knows what we doing now. He knew that before it happened. He knew what we could have done. He sees it all in the present time, right? So I think it's kind of ironic that what they're describing kind of seems to point to God. One other thing that they have on here, let's see, as around the 10 minute 25-second mark, they're talking about the Big Bang. He says how the Big Bang is a small part of a much larger whole, and I think it's important to keep in mind. Remember what he said earlier. If the Big Bang had a beginning, it's safe to assume that the multiverse had one too, because we observe the universe that we live in, and we're like, okay, well, it's safe to assume these other universes would be similar, especially if we're talking about universes that would, have life. So as Alex was saying, it doesn't answer the question. It just kind of moves it back. Philip Goff, and he's I'm not sure if he's an astrophysicist, but he's a physicist, and this is what he says in regards to the multiverse and fine tuning. And again, he's not a Christian. He's not a theist. I believe he's a deist from what I found and kind of what I saw. The reason some scientists take seriously the possibility of a multiverse in which the constants vary in different universes is that it seems to explain the fine tuning. But on closer examination, the inference from fine tuning to the multiverse proves to be instance of flawed reasoning. So what should we make of the fine tuning? Perhaps there is some other way of explaining it, or perhaps we just got lucky. It doesn't really give us there's no answers in there. It just it kind of pushes it back, but we don't get any clarity. And then, like he says, upon closer examination.
At one point he had said, you realize you only understood a small part. To that, I would say exactly. That's okay. I mean, but let's look at that in a different way. For example, I don't blame Darwin for not knowing what he didn't know, because he didn't have the access to the tools that would be necessary to investigate those things he didn't know. But we do. And Darwin didn't know that the discovery of DNA would cause his theory to break down, or that we discover and look in the cell and see that, as Mike B, he says, that it's irreducibly complex and that it can't be broken down to successive smaller parts that would evolve into larger parts. Because when you're taking a cell, it can't get together that way. Scientists have shown that. So once again, to even be able to have these conversations, you skipped, like, not you, but like he has skipped about 10 conversations that need to be had. How do you even exist? What do you exist as? You know, your cell being irreducibly complex means that someone had to put it together. Well, if someone put you together, then let's go find out who that someone was, and then maybe we'll get some answers.
Right.
But the idea of not knowing everything and therefore extrapolating to a conclusion that you feel comfortable with, I guess, is a good holding pattern, but it doesn't clarify truth. And Darwin, in his book, in The Origin of Species, in the Naturalist Bible, you know, he said in his own book, if it could be found that there is that anything could not be broken down to a successive smaller parts that could evolve into larger parts, then my theory would absolutely break down. He put that in his own book. And as you mentioned, Frank Turek has said, well, we now know there's many systems that fit that very thing. So therefore, in one sense, why are we still teaching Darwinism? Because he gave us the out and we have it now. Now that's more on biological side, but it all comes together because typically people who talk like Tyson are evolutionists as well. And so they marry those two as the completion of their theory. But this side of the theory, I mean, the physics side, maybe we can have some discussions with Tyson on, okay, this is, the math's still being worked out. Okay. But on the biological biochemistry side, we know way, way, way too much to be still thinking that God didn't do this. I can't explain the degree. There's 5 levels of language, from syntax to alphabetics. DNA is at the highest level of information, at the alphabetics level, where you're sending information with requesting a response for that information. That's complete sentences. We're composed of complete sentences, in a genetic sense. I just don't see how naturalism gets us there. And so I'm just looking at the evidence saying, oh, I know what I was going to say earlier about Ross. And I was asking him, I was like, look, I'm saying if I never heard the word Christian, never heard the word God, never heard the word Bible, and somebody just laid out all the evidence, some of which I've talked about, and you just laid it on the table in front of me, I'd be like, man, who did this? That would be my first question.
Right.
And so the reason I say who and not what is because it seems way too intentional, from DNA to morality to like, it's just, it had to be intentional from everything that I see. And so if we're looking for intent, blind physical forces can't be intentional. They just are. So I say, from the scientific evidence, it causes me to look for a who. And that's how I get here.
This is from Luke Barnes. It's talking about the fine-tuning of the universe for life. And he says, the meager test of the multiverse proved nothing. He's quoting Ellis and Silk in 2014. Fundamentally, the multiverse explanation relies on string theory, which is as yet unverified, and on speculative mechanisms for realizing different physics in different sister universes. It is not, in our opinion, robust, let alone testable. Goes back to what Alex was saying earlier. Like, the idea of the multiverse is not something that we can observe. It's not something that we can test in the same sense that we can do with other forms of science. And I think this also kind of showcases what he was talking about with DNA and all the complexities with the information and the languages. It's all very fine-tuned. And just because you posit these other ideas, I don't think that it doesn't get to the core of the question. We still don't know what or who caused all this. And if we don't look to God, we don't know why. These are questions that we need to answer. And as Alex mentioned earlier in the video, let's not just include the discipline of knowing. Let's add other ones in there and get a better, robust picture of what is going on. We're getting ready to wrap up. Alex, you got any final thoughts here?
No, thank you for having me. If anyone's watching has not subscribed to the channel, Relentless Pursuit of Purpose, I would love to have you over there. And I appreciate the discussion and bringing out these different topics and, just giving some other things to think about.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, man. I'll include the link to Alex's channel in the description of the video. He has a ton of great content on there. He's had a great number of great guests. Definitely go over and subscribe. But I'll catch you guys next time. Have a blessed day.
Peace.